Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Tom's Gadget Garage. Today I'm out here on the HeyBike Alpha to see just how much range we can crank out of this bike. Now according to HeyBike, we should be able to get approximately 60 miles of theoretical range, but keep in mind those are theoretical figures, usually factoring in a rider between 165 and 180 pounds of weight, riding around in the slowest pedal assist mode. Well folks, today I weigh in at about 200 pounds and we're going to be cruising around mostly in pedal assist 3 today to see what a more realistic range figure is going to look like. Now the course that we're going to be cruising around on today does have us riding on some streets as well as a very long bike trail, and anytime I'm riding my bike on the streets I'm always sure to install a mirror on the left handlebar. That way I can see who's coming up behind me, who's about to pass close. That way I have as much reaction time as possible. The mirror that I'm using is a Mi Chow mirror. I got it off of Amazon. I'll include a link in the description below, but I've been using that for the better part of the last 20 months, and it's served me well so far. No issues at all whatsoever. All right, we're gonna go ahead and cross over the street, make sure it's clear. This bike does have turn signals, by the way, so you can use those, but those are usually best for riding around at night. Usually during the day, turn signals and things like that look a little bit washed out. But anyways, what we're going to be doing is riding around on what we call the Power Line Trail out here. And this goes pretty much from the city of Mesa all the way down to Phoenix. And so, you know, this thing goes forever. And this is the same trail that I use to test, at least range test, all of my scooters and e-bikes. That way, you know, we do it in the most consistent way possible. Now I am going to be tracking today's ride with Garmin GPS, which is what I use to track all of my rides. And I found that that gives me the most accurate and consistent way to track these. That way we have a good frame of reference for comparison against some of this bike's competitors. Now one thing to mention is that this is a mid-drive bike, which is the first mid-drive I've actually featured on this channel. And so if you want to learn more about the specs and details of this bike, I will include a link to my first impressions and feature overview video. That's basically where I go over all the features of the bike and then take it out on a first impressions ride to see what this thing is capable of. I've also done our endurance hill climb with this bike, which saw us going up 17.5 miles or so of windy mountain roads. So if you're looking for a bike that can climb hills, this is definitely one of those. And if you want to check out that video, I'll be sure to include a link to that in the description as well. For check-ins today, I will be giving you updates every 6 to 8 miles or so. That way you have an idea of the progress that we're making. But this bike does have a 48 volt battery. It's 13.5 amp hours. According to HeyBike, that should be good for approximately 680 watt hours of capacity. So it is going to be one of the smaller battery fat tire e-bikes that I've tested out. But remember, this bike does use a mid-drive system, and mid-drives are usually a lot more efficient than their hub drive counterparts. But we'll absolutely be putting that to the test today. But if I were to do a quick estimate, I'd say probably around 38 to 42 miles. That's my prediction. But we'll see. This Power Line Trail that we're going to be riding on today is approximately 70% paved surface, 30% hard packed dirt. So that'll give us a good opportunity to kind of test out how this bike rides on varied riding surfaces. It does have 26-inch by 4-inch fat tires with a knobby tread. So you might hear some droning in the video right now, kind of a louder noise. That's not the motor, that is actually the tires. And so that knobby tread's gonna, you know, allow us to ride with comfort off the beaten path, which is part of what this bike is designed for. You know, if you want quieter tires, you could always put more of a street tread if you're gonna be cruising around on surface streets most of the time. As you can see here, we're cruising around on some hard packed dirt. It's where a knobby tread like this comes into play. That way you've got ample grip when cruising around on loose dirt and gravel and all that fun stuff. One of the nice things about these 26-inch by 4-inch fat tires is they also have a shock absorbing capacity to them. You know, with this bike, you know, they recommend inflating the tires to a maximum of 20 PSI. I've got us at about 18 to 19 right now, but they do a really good job of absorbing a lot of the smaller stuff in the road. Now for the bigger stuff, we do have the front fork suspension, which on this bike is a little bit stiffer, but you do have the ability to go in there and adjust the preload and all that fun stuff. So you can soften or harden that as you please. Go ahead and slow down. You might have saw that I downshifted when coming up to this light. Because this is a mid-drive bike, you do not want to shift gears when under load. You know, so I let off the power, let off the pedals a little bit. And then as soon as that motor disengaged, I went ahead and shifted gears. So, you know, that's how you extend the life of the drivetrain. Because on a mid-drive bike like this, the motor is tied directly to the drivetrain of the bike, which is not the case with the hub drive. With the hub drive, you've got a motor in the hub of the rear wheel or front wheel or both wheels, depending on the type of bike you have. And it goes to work spinning those wheels independent of your chain and crank. With the mid-drive, that motor is tied directly to your drivetrain. So you'll see the crank move. You know, if you were to lift the tires off the ground and apply power, that crank, that chain will be moving and driving that rear wheel. So definitely different than your typical hub drive bike. All right, here's some bumpier stuff. Okay, you can feel the bigger stuff come through, but you can definitely feel the suspension absorbing a lot of that, so it's not as crazy. A little more of that bumpy stuff there. Going over this gravel, no problem. Let's transition to the sidewalk. Definitely felt the front suspension absorb that. There is no rear suspension, so it is a hard tail. So just keep that in mind. There's also no suspension seat post, but if you want to add one of those, you can absolutely do that. That'll help improve the comfort in the rear a bit. For all of you keeping track, we just crossed the 6-mile mark. Bike is still showing 100% battery and full bars. We've been cruising around for about 27 minutes at this point, so we're making good progress. Now, one thing I do want to mention about the battery bars on these bikes is they're not always accurate. In fact, more often they're not accurate at all. So I always recommend looking at the voltage. Now, fully charged, this bike sits at about 54.4, 54.6 volts. And what we use as our turnaround point is about 60% battery remaining. So it's about 48.8 volts or so. So once we get down to that level, that's going to be our turnaround point. That way we can make it back to our starting point. Now, one thing to mention is that I use 60-65% as my turnaround point, because on electric bikes, electric scooters, you'll find that the first half of the battery is always more performant than the second half of the battery. And so if you are able to make, let's say, 20 miles on the first 50%, chances are, you know, given the exact same conditions, flat ground, you're not going to be able to make it back for the second 50%. And the reason for that is that as you wear that battery down, voltage goes down, you get less output, slower top speed, slower acceleration. And so factoring those in, I mark my turnaround point as about 60%. But the nice thing about this bike is that it's got a voltage readout, which I'm going to make my main metric on the screen right now. Some bikes do not have voltage readouts. All right, go ahead and downshift here before I forget to do that. That's definitely one of the big differences with these mid-drives is you have to really drive the bike and leverage those gears. With a hub drive, you know, you can get away with staying in one gear the entire time. In fact, I'm guilty of that too, you know. I put it in a nice solid gear and I can go cruise around for 40 miles without changing gears. You know, with a bike like this though, it drives more like a manual transmission, and so you definitely have to be on top of those gears. And that's going to be a difference with these mid-drive bikes. And I covered this in depth in my first impressions video, but I'm cruising around gear 4 right now, If I want to shift gears, I can just reduce the pressure on the pedals or stop pedaling altogether, shift, and then resume pressure to the pedals. I want to shift again, I reduce pressure on those pedals, shift, and I can start pedaling again. And that's just a little extra step with these mid-drives. Now straight up ahead is our pedestrian bridge. Going to give us an opportunity to test out the hill climbability of this bike a little bit. You know, it's relatively steep. And when you go up hills, you just want to make sure that you're in the correct gear ahead of time. That way you're not trying to shift gears when the bike is under load. All right, let's go into this. Just gently putting pressure into the pedals. And as you can see, this HeyBike Alpha is making easy effort of this little hill climb here. So we just made it to the top. And now on the downside, we'll test out the brakes. It's got hydraulic brakes, 180 millimeter discs in the front and the rear, which should provide plenty of stopping power. And as you can see, it does. So stopping power is not going to be an issue for you on this bike. All right, folks, so we officially crossed the 10-mile mark. We've been riding for about 45 minutes at this point. And as you can see, the battery bar here is full bars and 100% battery remaining, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Here's some train tracks. Right up and over those. Front suspension and those fat tires do a good job of dampening that blow there. But anyways, I recommend getting yourself a battery voltage conversion chart. I'll put one up on the screen. It's from a company called PidZoom. I actually reviewed one of their charge enhancers. But that way you can take, you know, the fully charged voltage of your battery, which with these is about 54.4, 54.6 volts. And then you can take a look at the different states of charge. So if, you know, you're seeing that you've got 48.8 volts, I don't see the chart now, but I think that's around 60% battery. And so, you know, you also want to keep in mind that a fully charged 48 volt battery is about 54.4, 54.6 volts. So that's how you use this chart. If you're looking for a 48 volt battery, you're not going to see 48 volts in the column headers there. You're going to be looking for 54.6. But those are very handy to have because as you can see, the battery bars, sometimes they're slow to update, you know, and it's only when they get below a certain threshold do they update. So it's not going to give you real-time accuracy. And that's basically the case for nearly every bike that I've tested when looking at just the battery bars. Now that the weather is finally warming up, you got little bugs and gnats that like flying around, especially around like a lot of like trees and bushes. So earlier I was talking and I inhaled a fly. That was awful. It was like a 5-minute coughing spell there, but finally got it out. You got to be careful on these rides when you're riding around faster. Quick little update here. We crossed the 15-mile mark. We've got about an hour and 4 minutes into this ride. And our voltage is officially at 50.6. So we're going to use around 48.8 as our turnaround point for resting voltage. But so far we're making good progress. And this bike is still extremely comfortable to pedal. Nothing has changed there. The seat, you know, on these longer rides, it can be a little more comfortable, but just keep in mind, seat comfort is a very personal thing, and what is uncomfortable for me might be very comfortable for you, so just keep that in mind. If you're watching this video and you're currently in the market for an e-bike, one of the stats that people are often looking at is going to be motor output. How strong is that motor? And two of the most common motor sizes are 500 and 750 watt. You do have some that are lower, and you do have some that, you know, kind of go above and beyond that. Actually, some bikes that have insane amounts of power. But motor power is going to be important because there's a direct correlation between motor power and output and hill climbability and acceleration and top speed and all that fun stuff. With this particular bike, it's got a 500 nominal watt motor. But keep in mind, this is a mid-drive. And mid-drives are going to be able to crank out significantly more torque than their 500 nominal watt motor hub drive counterparts. For example, this bike can put out a monstrous 105 Newton meters of torque, where a similarly equipped hub drive version of this bike would likely be able to put out somewhere between 55 and 65 Newton meters of torque. So mid-drives are going to give you more torquey experience, and generally speaking, are going to give you much improved hill climbability over the same kind of hub drive counterpart. All right, we're going to go ahead and turn into this park area, cruise around here. Always nice to ride through here on a day like this. All right, so we're going to ride over this cobblestone bridge, test out the suspension. Front suspension does a good job. Once again, it's a hardtail, so if you want a little extra cushion in the back, you can always get yourself a suspension seat post. It's usually do a really good job of improving the ride comfort in the back of the bike. All right, a little bit of a hill here. Power on through this, no problem at all. Cruise on through here, and then we'll get ourselves turned around and start heading back in the direction from where we started. All right, so I am cruising around in this gigantic bike lane. This thing's absolutely huge. And this is a little area that I actually have never been to before. And that's what I love about e-bikes, is that there's always an opportunity to explore places around you that you might not have even known existed, you know? Probably one of the best ways to get out there and adventure in your local community. You know, I wish all bike lanes were this big, you know? A lot of the streets here either have super narrow bike lanes or, in a lot of cases, no bike lanes at all, which is never exciting. I think I've got part of that fly in my windpipe still. Really unfortunate. That's the problem with riding and talking at the same time, you know. Get these bugs. And I'm always here yapping all the time, so I might have to wear some kind of mesh face cloth or something as the season starts warming up here. Man, oh man. And that can actually be pretty dangerous because we've got a ton of bees out here in Arizona, and I've had a couple close calls where I'm talking, riding, and I have a bee bounce off my cheek or the side of my lip. These are not things that you're normally thinking about, but it happens. You got to be careful. I've heard of some freak accidents around those kind of scenarios. All right, we're going to cruise on down under the bridge here and start making our way back. We'll loop around the lake here. Here's a little hill. Actually, not a little, it's actually quite steep. Here's the mid-drive in action. So super steep hill, easily make it up with this bike. All right, folks, this is gonna mark our turnaround point. We're about 22 miles into this ride right now. We'll turn around here and head on back. We're at about 49.3 volts, so we'll take some detours on the way back. That way we can make it back as close to our starting point as possible without having to take a bunch of last-minute detours at the end. But if this voltage readout is correct, we are making very good progress on this bike with the 680 watt-hour battery. For fat tire e-bikes, this is actually the smallest battery that I've tested. So yeah, there's that. So quick update for you folks. Looks like we just crossed the 30-mile mark. We've been riding for about 2 hours and 5 minutes at this point. Voltage is sitting at around 46.3. So we're actually making very good progress. One thing that I will be doing with this bike in a future video is some trail riding. See how this mid-drive handles cruising around off the beaten path. It should definitely be fun. Probably gonna take it to, I think it's Santan Regional Park. They got some nice trails out that way. So we'll see exactly what this bike is capable of. As you can see, our voltage is around 44 volts, but we're still able to maintain speed. No problem at all. So, it's doing pretty good. Like I mentioned a couple times already, as that battery wears down, on these long rides, you get closer and closer to zero, you get less and less output. But so far, we're holding strong. Pretty surprising results so far out of this bike, It's got a smaller battery than you're typically used to seeing in a lot of fat tire e-bikes. But this mid-drive, looking like it really is more efficient. They say those things, they publish it, oh, it's more efficient, but you don't really know until you test it out on your own. And we're making really good progress. But yeah, if you're on the fence about getting an e-bike, I'm going to tell you right now, in my opinion, it's completely worth it. It doesn't even have to be an e-bike. It could be a regular bike, get something. Go out there, explore, go get some fresh air, But what an e-bike is going to do, though, is it's going to greatly shrink the world around you and allow you to go out and explore things that are further out than you might be able to do on a regular pedal bike. At least that's the case for me. With this, it takes a lot longer for me to get worn out and tired, so. All right, we are heading back onto the streets. Got my lovely mirror here so I can keep an eye out. We are just now crossing the 38-mile mark. We've been riding around for about 2 hours, 40 minutes at this point. I'm seeing voltage around 44.2. Battery bar is now saying 32%, which is getting closer and closer to being accurate. So still making good progress. We'll see how we do as we get closer. We might have to take some detours to wear out the battery a little bit more. But we're still able to maintain speed, no problem at all. Acceleration feels just as strong as it did when we started out. Maybe 95% of what it was when we started out. But right now I'm riding comfortably. I'm in gear 7 right now, by the way. Still in pedal assist 3 as we've been the whole time. And we're GPS speed about 19, 20 miles an hour. All right, looks like we just crossed the 40-mile mark with this 680 watt-hour battery bike. 2 hours, 47 minutes so far. Battery bar on the screen showing 30%. It just dropped. So, all right, folks, quick little update. I definitely feel a pretty big drop in power output, so it is taking longer to get up to speed. And I do have to put in a little more effort to maintain the same speeds I was able to maintain before. So on the last bar, it's blinking. It says 0% battery remaining, although when I take my feet off the pedals, it does bounce back up, let's say 13%. But regardless, we are at the bottom of this battery. Oh yeah, I am definitely feeling reduced output. We're getting close to the end. Gear 5, gear 6. It's definitely lost its steam. So any moment now, we'll be at the end of this ride, and I'll download the GPS data real quick and we'll take a look at our official stats. All right, folks, at this point, it looks like I am no longer getting any battery. It is completely empty, showing the little flashing red battery on the screen. So we're gonna go ahead and call it. Now I've officially stopped the GPS tracking. I'm manually pedaling the bike right now to a place where we can just kind of stop, take a look at the bike and see how we did. But you know, if you're in a situation where you run out of power, you can absolutely ride this bike without electric assist. So if you do run into that situation, it's definitely feasible. All right, folks, so there you have it. That was our range test on the HeyBike Alpha. On today's ride, get this, 44.36 miles. We were riding around at an average moving speed of 14.7 miles an hour. We hit a top speed of 22.1 miles an hour, elevation gain of 486 feet, and we were cruising around today for 3 hours and 5 minutes. So as you can see, that was absolutely fantastic performance out of this HeyBike Alpha. 680 watt hours of capacity. I did not think we would be going over 44 miles today. So anyways, really good performance out of this bike. If you do want to pick one of these up, I will include a link as well as any available coupon codes in the description below. And if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, let me know in the comments section below. And as always, thank you so much for tuning into Tom's Gadget Garage. We'll see you next time.